I know that you were very busy in these early days of your administration to make time for us. It took a while to negotiate the exact right time, but I think this is a good time. I didn't realize that yesterday was the State of the Union, which might have had some priority over this. So thank you for being here. My name is Robert Gordon. I'm the president of the Chevy Chase Community Association. Sitting beside me is Rasheen Carbon. He is a new member of our board. He is a vice president of CCCA. I see in the house a couple of other executive committee members, Sandy Solar and Jory Barone. I also want to welcome Peter Goslin, an ANC commissioner, and he is responsible for 3G06, which is a lot of the houses on this side of the street and the commercial strip on the other side of the street. I'm not sure I see any other.
Peter.
Oh, Peter. Yes. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you for being here.
And Peter is another ANC commissioner. He is very involved with the reconstruction, the rethinking of the center that we're going to get into a great deal. So as I can see, we're all visible. We have a lot of people tuning in online. So finally, I'd like to thank the Chevy Chase Community Center staff. They've done a terrific job in getting this place to look nice and well organized. So thank them, and I've treated them to some pizza. I hope that will smooth the way for the next event that we have. So here are some of the rules of the road in a meeting like this. So this is the first meeting that I'm aware of that is a hybrid format. That is, we're having it in person, but we're also live streaming it. We have, and we're checking out the technology. We're trying to figure out how this can work for this meeting and for future meetings. And we're hoping that future meetings will operate this way, because there's nothing like the enthusiasm one gets in a room of people who are very committed to the issues, but also you want to make it as broad as possible. And it looks like we have probably 30 or 40 people who are tuning in from outside. So you know, this meeting will be recorded. It'll be public record. It'll be up on our website within a few days. In person, that's you. Audience members will have an opportunity to ask questions. The way I'd like you to do it is to write your question out on a card. We'll sort through them, see that we take out redundancies, and then ask you to speak your mind, ask your question. We're expecting that all questions are brief, to the point, and to the extent possible, non-repetitive. And for both viewers that are live streaming and for people here, please respect your how nice I know people are at Chevy Chase. So let's start getting down to the substance of the matter. Councilmember Frumin, we're interested in your legislative agenda. We know what you ran on. We know what your stated priorities are when you were running. Now that you're a council member, we'd like to learn more about what it is you hope to achieve in your first term, as well as the committee assignments that you've received. So if you would please talk to that and sort of lay out your vision for your term. Big question.
Yeah, big question. So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to all the folks who have come and who are online. I guess I'll start with the committee assignments. The way the committee assignments work is that Phil Mendelson asks everybody to come over and talk to him about the things that they're interested in. And you sit with them and go through the list of committees that you're interested in and agencies that you're interested in. He takes all of that on board from 12 different people, and he tries to figure out how to divvy things up so that he can keep at least 7 people happy, so it will pass through the council when there's a vote on it. And we had that meeting in the fall. I made 2 mistakes in this process. Then we had a meeting, I think December 21st, where he announced the committee assignments. And I looked at my list and I said, I got every single thing I want. And I was very grateful. I let it be known that I'd gotten every single thing that I wanted. That night or the next night, no, it was that night, there was a party at the Ivy City Smokehouse, a council party, and your big party with a go-go band playing. And I was feeling, very cheerful about everything. And Phil Mendelson came in. The music was so loud, you really had to get right up close to people to be heard. And I sort of yelled in his ear that, I was really pleased and excited that I got every single thing that I wanted. And then I went home, and the next morning I woke up and I had COVID. So I had to tell people that I had COVID, and I had been in a spreader event. I'm not a super spreader, that's so sure a super spreader event. And Phil Mendelson is convinced that I gave him COVID for Christmas. So I had made it very clear that I had gotten every single thing that I wanted. Other people did not feel the same way. There were people who felt like they hadn't gotten anything that they wanted. And so between December 21st and when there was an actual vote in the council, I lost one of the things that I wanted and went to somebody else. And I had to decide whether to fight it, which would be a stupid thing for a freshman to do. And I said to Phil, I accepted it, and I said, I hope that you will see me as a good sport and not a pushover. And he assured me that he would. So where did I land? I landed with housing, which is, couldn't be more important. Transportation and the environment, which is very important to me. Facilities and family services, which is also very important, but the key on that one is that it has oversight over DGS, which does the modernization of the schools and the rec centers and manages the buildings. And that's a very important issue for people in Ward 3. I really wanted to be in a committee with oversight over DGS. Elections and administration, executive administration and labor. And that one was not so much on my list, but some of the agencies under it were, and including the elections agencies, which is an area of interest for me. Over the years, I have done election observing and things like that all around the world, and so that was an area of interest for me. And the one I lost was health. And health, I chair the board at the Lusner Home. We have a lot of long-term care facilities I used to chair the board at the Lusner Home. I resigned right before I joined the council. A lot of long-term care facilities in Ward 3, Civic Hospital. Health is very, very, I had a big interest in health, and I was sorry to lose it. I instead got put on the hospitals and health equity committee that Vince Gray is chairing. So it's still a really great mix of things that the committees that I'm on. Legislative agenda and long-term goals for a first term. I'm not sure that's gelled yet. I have to figure out how I fit in and what are the things where I'm going to bring expertise. One, for sure, is education. Spent a decade and a half doing advocacy on education. I think I bring kind of expertise and experience in that area that's going to be important. That's under the committee of the whole. So I'm part of the committee of the whole. I may do legislation on school budgeting. The thing that is urgent right now are the school budgets that are going to come out with the school budget should come out in the next week or so. And then we'll learn more about how they were formulated when the mayor releases her budget. But the school budgets are making sure that our schools are fully funded is an urgent priority for me this week and will be for my addressing school overcrowding and making sure that our buildings are great is another thing, which is where the DGS piece and having oversight over DGS fits in. The one that's big right at the moment is the Stoddard addition, which I spent last night on a SIP call with the Stoddard team. I've been working with people trying to make sure that Stoddard gets an addition that's appropriate. Two that are been controversial are the Foxhall Elementary School and the MacArthur High School, and we'll see how those things play through. MacArthur seems to have legs, and I'm really hopeful that we can make that succeed and address overcrowding at Wilson. But making sure that our school infrastructure is excellent is going to be a high priority for me.
Well,
You want me to pause? And
Yeah,
you jump to another?
we can start getting into some depth. I'm very pleased that you're on the Housing Committee, and I'm very pleased that you're on the Transportation and Environment Committees, because those are two issues that are really burning issues in Chevy Chase. So what I'd like to do is start out with transportation. As you know, the issue of bike lanes in Chevy Chase is a hot item. It's a hot item, and I'm hoping that you can shed light rather than heat on the issue. What we do know, I think we know, that you are an advocate of bike riding. I was wondering whether you rode your e-bike to this meeting tonight.
You know, I didn't have time because I just got home at 6:10 and needed to get there. So I didn't, but I ride it every single place and wish I had, but I just didn't have time.
So the question, there are two levels to this question. The first one is sort of a superficial level that I want to address right off the bat, and that is, do you support DDOT's planned bicycle lanes along Connecticut Avenue? I think you've talked to that in other forum.
Really, and really, people in Chevy Chase care about the bike lane issue.
Yes, I would say.
I think that
I know you said that with some level of
Yeah,
sarcasm.
so I mean, there has been, I have been on record on this for a long time. I support adding bike infrastructure. I support in general the plan that has been proposed for bike lanes on Connecticut Avenue. As I said during the campaign, people have raised a variety of concerns. Some of those concerns relate to making sure that there's adequate parking for small businesses. Some concerns about making sure that there's adequate parking and loading. Actually, for the small businesses, also added loading and parking, because there are many people who are going to drive to Connecticut Avenue. They're not going to ride their bike here in Chevy Chase. The catchment area for the commercial district is very big, and there are people who, for many different reasons, are not going to ride a bike to the commercial district, and they're not going to walk. It's too far, and so they're going to drive, and we need to accommodate that. But I also do feel strongly that we need to accommodate new modes of transportation, and that the move to add bike infrastructure throughout the city and including here is important. And I want to try to shape what comes out so that it, to the maximum extent possible, addresses the concerns that people have raised, but I do want it to succeed and for the best to go. And I know there's many people who feel differently about that,
So,
but I've been there from the start.
so let me ask, the plans right now are from Legation Street south along Connecticut Avenue, Legation Street north to the circle. I don't know if the plans are still in works or what the status is. Do you have an update for us what the status is of the planning process?
Yeah, I think that they are starting to look at the feasibility of going further to the north. And I think that going to the north, going north of Legation Street. The last time that I talked with them, that was the thing they were talking about. And I wondered, why would you go all the way up to the circle if there isn't a bike lane on the other side of the circle? And I don't know that they're thinking about going all the way up to the circle. And I don't know how that's all going to come out. But I think that many people have thought for all along, like it's inevitable that they were going to try to go for the north. And I think they're thinking about trying to go for the north. And how that would work, because one of the things that DDOT did in the fall was a block by block walk to look at how to address the issues. And I would assume they would have to do that kind of a thing and think about whatever it is that they may have in mind. One of the things that that some people have raised is wherever it is, like that you want to be strategic to avoid cars going off into the side streets. And so where you do that cutoff can be in part driven by that. I've looked very closely at everything up to Legation Street. I don't know what they're precisely what they're.
So I'd like to, you're going to be faced in the next 4 years with many issues that have costs and benefits, that have two sides of an issue. I think this transportation bike lanes is a good example of that. On the one side, there are many bicyclists who are very eager to see these protected bike lanes. DDOT says that there are about 100 of them, 100 bicyclists a day. I have to trust DDOT. On the other hand, people are saying that it will bollocks up the transportation into the city. It'll remove 2 lanes of transportation. It'll cost people more time and in many ways more energy because you're using cars and maybe they're taking extra 15 minutes to get downtown. So you're balancing 2 sides of an issue. Both have benefits, both have costs. How do you think about that? Because it's going to be important, I think, not only the people of Chevy Chase, but the people of the all of Ward 3 to sort of understand how you consider these kinds of problems.
Yeah, so when I think of myself as a problem solver and a consensus builder, I'm not sure on the bike lanes that's going to be a thing that will happen, but I'll use an example that I used over and over again during the campaign as an illustration of the way in which I think. When I first joined the ANC, there was a proposal to put lights on Women's Park, and some of you might remember that. And I like the idea of expanded access to playing fields. When I was a kid, I played under the lights in baseball and it was thrilling, and I liked the idea of making it. There were people who lived nearby who were very concerned about it, in particular, people who lived in the cul-de-sac across the street. And if you think about it, if you lived in that cul-de-sac and you thought about cars coming in at night when there needed to be lights, and driving and parking in the cul-de-sac and pulling in and out of the cul-de-sac with their headlights washing over every house in the cul-de-sac, you wouldn't want it either. And then there was an informal dog group that was using the park in the mornings and was a social thing, but also a place where dogs could run freely. And they were concerned that significant improvement to the park was going to result in them losing access to the park. And I worked for months with both of those groups and with the Little League to try to figure out how can you make this work? Because I wanted to see the lights go on, but I was sensitive to the concerns of the other people who would be impacted. And what we came up with was the dog group did a memorandum of understanding of what they were going to do and how it was going to work on the field and how they were going to do cleanup and the hours that they would do there and the hours that they wouldn't. And the Little League did a memorandum of understanding that they wouldn't go in the cul-de-sac, that they would set somebody up with sawhorses kind of to block the cul-de-sac and not let their people go into the cul-de-sac. And that's probably close on 15 years ago. And during the campaign, I went for a meet and greet at the park with the dog group, and it's 15 years later, and that agreement is. And so that's the way that I approach issues. I really do try to listen to what's on people's mind and try to address it as best I can and not get dogmatic one way or the other on these kinds of things. And that's the approach that I've taken. I could walk you through chapter after chapter of my life in public service, and that's the way I'll do it.
You're familiar, I'm sure, with cost benefit analysis, which is one way of evaluating the public good. So putting a cost on the value of 100 or 200 bicyclists who can have a safer ride against hundreds or thousands of drivers. Is there a way, have you considered using such a method in your deliberations?
So the cost benefit analysis on this is different. The cost benefit analysis, it's not just about those people who ride and how many of them, although growing the use of bicycles as a mode of transportation is a good thing. One of the things that people are sensitive about is slowing down traffic, and yet slowing down traffic actually is one of the goals of the project. This is Connecticut Avenue has had a lot of crashes, and slowing down traffic is a thing that is being talked about for all parts of the city. And so in your cost benefit analysis, think about that also. Think about also, and this goes to conversations that have been going on about the e-bike subsidy. And, you know, you asked, did I ride my e-bike here? I didn't ride my e-bike here. I rode my e-bike from the Wilson building to my house. And that's how I go back and forth to the Wilson building. And my wife got an e-bike, and I'm pleased that she's a convert. And we don't use a parking space that somebody else wants, who needs to drive, will use. And people are going to make choices about how they do their transportation, but I think we want to create incentives for people to use other kinds of modes of transportation than cars. So the cost benefit analysis, yes, like, does this make sense from when you think about all of the different potential benefits, is it worth all of the other costs? I hope we all think in that sort of way, that we don't do things just because of some sort of an ideology about it, but we're all doing that. But what are those factors that go into that calculation? You may calculate it differently than I calculate it.
We're going to take questions at the end. Write your questions down. We're going to take them up in a batch. But I'd like to move on to another topic. We'll return, I promise, with plenty of time for answering questions. So let's talk about affordable housing in Ward 3. I'm not talking about the community center library right now. I will get to that, I promise you.
I'm sure you will. I hope you will.
But I would like to talk about it more broadly in terms of the mayor's goals across what she calls, or we call, Rock Creek West. The mayor has called by 2025 for 36,000 new residences across the district.
Right.
Of those 36,000, she's called for 12,000 affordable units. We don't know what level of affordability, that has not been defined. And she's called for 1,990 affordable units in Rock Creek West. I'm sure we all know what Rock Creek West is. I looked at the statistics, and what I've seen is that since the beginning of 2009, a total of 1,583 units of affordable housing have been produced across the entire city. That's fewer units than they're asking for in
I don't know where you saw that.
these are IZ.
I see, yeah.
I
Because
see.
that's only one way
One
in
way.
which affordable housing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the IZ program is clearly a disappointment and clearly not the path to get to where we would need to get.
For the layman, could you explain what I did?
So IZ is called the inclusionary zone. So when a developer builds a new building, they have a requirement that some percentage of the units in that new building will be affordable. And that's inclusionary zoning. That percentage has been 8%. It actually might be about square footage, but in about 8% of the units in a typical new building that gets any kind of zoning really has to be affordable. And that's been one of the important ways to get affordable housing. And often the inclusionary zoning, and if you looked, I looked at some of this data today too, it tends to be at the higher levels of affordability. So 80% of what's called AMI, average median income, and whereas the most deeply affordable is called 30% of AMI, 30% of the average median income in the area, which could be $40,000 or less than that. And so the inclusionary zoning program is, I think this
One
might be
way.
where your question was going, is not the path.
It's not the path. Well, I have other statistics, but since you've already answered that,
It's not.
we'll dispense with that part of it. But what Councilmember Frumin has made clear is that the IZ program has been falling very short of its goals.
Yeah, I think
What other ways are there to count affordable housing in Ward 3?
Yeah, so I mean, the Lisbon project, which I was a part of, which was a mission-driven organization that was willing to give up some of the land value and in order to build affordable housing, is one of those paths. And so Lisner is building 93 units of deeply affordable housing, and on a site that had it been owned by a commercial entity, they wouldn't have. They couldn't have justified doing it, but for Lisner, they could justify doing it based on mission. There is also places like this public land where there's the opportunity to add housing into the mix of other things that can be done. There's that around Ward 3. People talk about the idea of the district purchasing properties and using those properties to build mixed income housing at levels that would be higher than IC. There's a lot of talk about development on all of the corridors. There's the planning for the Connecticut Avenue corridor, there's the planning for the Wisconsin Avenue corridor, and we should be looking for ways to incentivize projects there that would have higher affordability levels. They are, in many instances, it'd be automatic if they do a map amendment under the comprehensive plan, but get you to higher levels of affordability through that. And then you have things like in Friendship Heights right now, many of the projects are more like these IZ things. That's the percentages that you're going to get. But at the WMATA bus garage and the Lord and Taylor site, those are big possibilities. And there's what can you do there? Those are in like quasi-public entities. What can the city do? Or the bus garage is owned, the current bus garage is owned by WMATA, and they're trying to purchase the Lord and Taylor site. What can you do to leverage there so you can increase affordability? And I would stress that I'm all for affordability, deeply committed as folks who have worked with it, win, no, but I also think mixed income is important. So you have to look for your opportunities in an environment like Ward 3 where the land values are very high, but they can be found. They exist.
It's been my experience, and I've talked to several of the ANC commissioners, that there is affordable housing that we just don't recognize. That there are ADUs that provide for affordable housing. There are Section 8 vouchers that provide for affordable housing. And what I've asked the ANC, and I haven't received a response, is to do a survey of all of the housing around the neighborhood and find out how many units there really are. Because I think when the blanket statement is that Chevy Chase is opposed to or reluctant to or resistant to affordable housing, I think that's a big mistake. I think there is affordable housing here. It's just not counted in a way that is comprehensive. And I'd love to have your support to do a, say, apartment building by apartment building look at whether or not affordable housing actually exists here.
Yes, so I'm for it, but I also think you missed a different category, which was rent stabilized apartments. I think that
Exactly, yes.
I think that there is particularly when you think about rent stabilized apartments, I think that there is a significant amount of affordable housing in this community. The mayor wants to add more. The mayor wants to add more everywhere. I support that. I mean, we need to have places where the people who work here can live. I don't know, you set it up that people say Chevy Chase might be against affordable housing. I would never say that. I don't think that's the case. I think, and this goes back to the way in which one looks at the issues. There was a lovely article that Cortland Flight did, and I said, I don't think people in Ward 3 care about the color of the skin of the person who lives next door to them. They're worried about whether they're going to take their parking space. I think the issue is not about not wanting affordable housing. I think that there is concern about what's the shape of a future on Connecticut Avenue and in Chevy Chase going to look like. How is it going to impact the houses that border the commercial district? How's that all going to fit in? And what impact is it going to have on parking on the residential streets? I don't think we don't want affordable housing. I mean, I think there is, and it's a spectrum of how different people feel about it. But I think there's different appetites for how much growth and change period people want to see on the corridors everywhere in the city and in Ward 3. And that's driven, I don't believe it's driven by a desire to exclude. I think it's driven by concern about losing something that people feel like is good the way that it is, or that change will too severely adversely affect them. And that's the conversation we need to be having. How do you do it? How do you, and maybe we'll get to this site when we
We're
talk
heading
about
in that
that.
direction.
But how do you do it on this site where you do it, where people nearby feel that it was fair to them, where I can look them in the eye and say, you know, I know that you may not in the end of the day be for this, but I feel comfortable that what was done feels fair. That's at the end of my term. I want to feel like I helped bring change, but on terms that people could feel comfortable.
So let's move to this particular location, which has clearly been one of deep controversy. I want to preface that CCCA is 109 years old, and all of that time has been devoted, among other things, to the stewardship of this particular site. And it goes back to early schools that were built here, schools that CCCA requested the government to build all across the neighborhood. So we have a very long history, and that's why it's very close to my heart. So here is what is going on and most immediately troubling a lot of people, and that is DEMPED, the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, is pushing to have a part of the property surplused, and they're doing it in a very rapid manner. The ANC pushed back. They wrote a letter saying, we do not want to have the property surplused until we have much more information about the process. And CCCA supports that position. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the word surplus got into the mix here, and it's gotten people upset in a way that is understandable because I mean, the first reaction to it was they're going to give this property over to a developer, they're going to surplus it and give it over to a developer, and then it's all out of our control, and that created a lot of concern among people who have advanced the idea of having a new rec center and library with housing and affordable housing above for years. Even those people were like, what's going on here, when that word got injected into the process. And the ANC, to its credit, said, we need to, before we feel like this is taking on a life of its own that we don't have input into, we don't want to see something called surplus happen. Well, I've said the exact same thing and will be saying in the next day to DEMPED that, I don't want to vote on surplusing before there's a lot more input, before there's input into an RFP, before we have a better idea of what's being contemplated and how it's going to be judged. Ideally, I don't want to vote on surplusing until we see a project and that we could evaluate about whether or not it checks all of the boxes. In the council, there has been some concern that there are places where the city has done surplusing and disposition at the same time. So there's a vote to surplus the property and then to give it to choose the developer who's going to do the property all at the same time. And often there's been little or no input before you get to that place. And so there's been some concern about separating those things, to separate surplusing from disposition. I actually, in this context, in my ideal world, I'd vote on surplusing and disposition at the same time. I don't want to say thumbs up or thumbs down till I know what it is, until we've had a lot more input into the process than we have now. And I've been very clear to DEMPED and will be in a letter in the next day or so, All that said, I do think we can navigate this process to get to something that would be great. And not everybody shares that view, but I do. And I also know that one way or another, this is a legacy project for me. I will be judged by what comes out of this process. And so I'm very engaged to try to make sure that it is something that I can be proud of. And I talked about what are those kinds of things that enable me to feel proud of something. It will be to have a great new rec center, a great new library, housing and affordable housing and transitions to the neighborhood. I want to see underground parking so that, and including underground parking that can help to serve the commercial district. And I'm going to push for those things that every step.
Well, I approved, I agree with you, and I think that CCCA agrees with you in principle.
And I'll just say on that, Jerry Mallett, who's here, many of these issues are things that we were, during the campaign, were asked, where do you stand on this, and to try to fit it in. I don't know, Jerry, you were pretty strict. I don't know if it was 100 or 250 words, but what I just said is exactly what I said in response to Jerry's questions, and is public record here, public record 5 months ago.
As I think you said, surplus and disposal does not have to occur legally until substantially down the road. First, in my mind, you need plenty of public input. What do we want to see on this land?
Mhm.
Then that goes into an RFP. An RFP will then will be as specific as we want it to be. And people will have an opportunity to say, well, you will be a leader, I suppose, along with the ANC, in suggesting what should be in this complex.
Yeah.
So let me explore with you what your vision. I mean, you said we want a great community center, and if you look around, you can tell this is not a great community center, and it's not been one probably for 50 years. The library is behind the times, and I agree it needs to be completely renovated. Nobody, I haven't talked to anybody in this neighborhood who argues with that. But what I'm interested in and what I'd like to know is your vision of the housing portion. There are people out there, Ward 3 Vision, smarter growth people who are saying we want 100 units here. We don't know whether or not we can pay for parking. We believe that we need 5 buildings. That's on their website. No one else, to my mind, has come up with a vision that is different from that. I would like to hear from you what you think would be a reasonable amount of housing, a reasonable way of dividing that housing. Would it all be affordable? Would it be partially market rate and partially affordable? How do you break it down?
Yeah, so I have a great skill at disappointing everybody. So, and this is a place where the ANC, and I'm not, it's unfortunate Peter left because it's not because he left.
No, he said the 2 Peters on the back there.
I don't entirely align with the ANC on this at this point, and that the ANC was talking about sort of design charrettes up front and doing different things. I think the way this works is that you create criteria in an RFP for how a project is going to be judged. And then you get responses back. and you evaluate those responses. So, and there are things where there's trade-offs. And I'm not an architect and designer, so I don't want to say it's got to be X of this and X of that because there's trade-offs. So here are trade-offs. Levels of affordability and numbers of units and transition to the neighborhood. So how does it, I want to see significant numbers and percentages of affordable housing, but I also want to see transitions to the neighborhood. I also want to see underground parking. I want that to be part of the criteria. I also want to see green in play space that's like the green in play space that we have now. Better minds than I did, designers and architects and finance people will look at the site and try to figure out how they can check the boxes that are in that list of criteria. And I think we should all be working together on how we come up with those criteria and then evaluate it. So I don't know what the number of units are. I could be comfortable with it being pretty high on Connecticut Avenue, so long as it wasn't so high right as it got back towards the neighbors. But this is where you create criteria on which you're going to judge the project, and then you see what different teams competing trying to get the project come up with. I think that's the way this process works. And then at the end of the day, you still have a vote on surplusing and disposition, depending on how those ideas come forward. So I hear that you'd like to hear my prescription, but my prescription is criteria, not specifics.
No, actually, the reason I earlier on asked you to tell us how you think about problems was to lead up to this particular question, was how we can hope for you to lead using your method of perception and thinking about this particular problem with the costs and the benefits laid out on the table.
So in one, I am hearing people who are talking about different things, and I don't respond on the listservs, but I do read the listservs, so I am following what's on people's minds. If I start personally responding on the listservs, then I'm done, and I'll never do anything else for folks. So sometimes I criticize that you just have to take it and move on. But I am listening to what's on people's minds. I came to the meeting. I will always go to the meetings to hear what people are thinking. And I am always looking for that through. And the through line for me is a lot about consensus building. So my hope is to convene periodic meetings with DemPed, with representatives of the ANC, with Janice Lewis George's office, and be funneling input into the RFP process and then funneling input hopefully into the analysis of the project. Some of the analysis of the projects is a little bit of a black box for most of us because there are financials underneath, and the city officials who have to pick a developer. You could have a beautiful picture, but it might not be financially viable, and we will see that stuff in the same way. But I want to create a channel for public input, including those meetings. I want to see DemPed coming out to the community and presenting on how they're thinking about it, and work together to shape it. Because like I said, one way or another, this is a legacy project.
One final question from me before we go to the audience. And you mentioned financing. I had a knowledgeable person come up with what would be the cost of building the library, the community center, and housing. And these are ballpark figures and they have certain assumptions. But to rebuild the library and the community center was in the $70 million range. To build the housing, the city would have to kick in about $18.5 million. So, are you prepared to fight for that budget to make this happen?
I mean, I'm prepared to fight. I don't know, but I don't want to.
I'll give you this.
Yeah, but I don't want to say what numbers I'm willing to fight for, but I'm absolutely committed to fight for the funding necessary to have a great library and a great rec center. And one of the things is we had the oversight hearing for the libraries the other day, and I met with the head of the libraries. You know, I don't want to see any compromise. My meeting with the head of DPR is coming up. It's a week or so away. I don't want to see any compromise in the quality of the library and the rec center in order to somehow subsidize doing housing. It's the library and the rec center. Going back again to that RFP criteria, one of them is the functionality and completeness of the library and the rec center. And one of the things that's going to be tricky about this RFP process is any team that's going to put together a proposal needs to have an expert in libraries and rec centers on it, because a plain old developer doesn't know from designing a library. You need to have the people with the expertise to do it. But yeah, I think I plan to ask for more money for the library and the rec center in a budget letter that I'll submit in the next couple of days. And if it looks like it's going to take more money than that, then I'll make a request for that as we go down the line. We got to have a great library.
Would you gather, Sandy, would you gather these questions, and we're going to go through them very quickly up here, and then we'll ask you to speak them out loud. Yes. You didn't see it on the site?
Then you're talking about floors.
No, buildings. I'll show you.
Well, it doesn't so much matter. We need to have a great RFP that has the appropriate criteria, and then we're going to see how talented people come back and
I'm hoping you put your name on this so I can call on you. The one on the top is you? Okay. Go ahead.
Do you want to read? Do you want to?
Yes,
The question is, you're talking about pipelines. It's hard for me to even think about signing on to an approval of that without an idea of what your compromise is going to look like. And I agree with the cul-de-sac and the compromise made in the memorandum of understanding. But in respect to doing away with parking places and downtown and the effect on small businesses and the side streets. I haven't been able to think of something that I would propose as a compromise on that. Do you have any starting thoughts on what you would propose to take care of the effects?
Yeah, so we did this block by block, and it was over a 3 or 4 day period where we went from Woodley to aggregate. It was like 18 hours worth of going block by block. I guess I'll use a couple of examples. One thing that you see concern about is the zoo, because the zoo is already travesty. So what happens with if there's fewer lanes by the city? And that's a challenge. That's a complicated challenge since it's the federal government. It used to be that loading, the buses and loading happened internal on the zoo property. We need to move them to get them to do that again, because that's one thing. When you get to Cleveland Park, I was concerned in the proposal that there was a parking only on one side of Cleveland Park between Macomb and Broadway. Because some of the small businesses said that they almost less about parking as pickup, that Uber and some things like that.
Not just that they're out of business.
So actually, I mean, there have been studies done of how much of the business in those places is drive-up business and how much of it is walk-up business. And it's those are interesting things to look at, and they're specific to that area. But nevertheless, you do need to have parking and loading for the businesses, and I think you need to get to a place where there's parking and loading on both sides of Connecticut in that stretch of Connecticut Avenue. As you go to the next block to the north, where Sam's Park thing is, I think that's a solution of that parking lot, which is very expensive, but are there creative things that we can do there where grant programs so that can be a validated parking lot for the small businesses, and you could then have parking on the other side of the street. Then you get into stretches as you go north of Porter Street, where you have apartment buildings on both sides of the street, and those apartment buildings are different. And the oldest apartment buildings don't have, built in like the 20s, they don't have parking garages because it wasn't a thing. And then you have part of buildings that were built more in a car era, and they have parking garages. And some of them have driveways that you can go in, and some of them don't. And so there it gets like, is this a block where there really isn't a way for, or a side of the street where there really isn't a way for somebody to get picked up by an Uber or a repair person who comes to be able to park? So are there things that you can do that you would allow for parking on that side of the street where there was really a need that if you didn't have it, it would create a particular problem?
But the proposals for bike lanes is to take away and on either side.
Well, so, and there's,
Both sides.
so, and I have expressed this view about that it needs to be micro, and you need to look at those places. When I went on that walk, and one of the things that was said in the recent meeting in Cleveland Park was that DDOT was looking at that, and they were thinking about narrowing the bike lanes to 4 feet in a number of places in order to have parking and loading on one side of the street in certain places. Now, folks in the bike community have pushed back and said 4 feet's too narrow, so you shouldn't do it that way. And there's going to be a tug of war about this, about how is it, where is it needed that it should be narrowed in that way so that there can be parking and loading on one side of the street, and where does that not need to happen? But that's the give and take. Now, the give and take at that level, there's lots of people who, on a much bigger picture level are against it, but that's where I'm doing the tug of war. That kind of thing.
Just have a general comment from the chat. Could everyone speak up more loudly? They're having problems hearing questions. And everyone. Question we have is, stick with this issue of bike lanes. Where does the pedestrian factor in to all of this talk?
Yeah, so we also we want a world that's safe for pedestrians, and right now bicycles sometimes go on the sidewalk, and that's a danger for pedestrians. So the whole thing needs to be sorted out so that it works for pedestrians and works for bicyclists. There is concern about how do people get across the street and how do they cross the bike lanes and get on buses, and that's a thing that has to be a focus to make sure that it's done in a way that's safe. But it can be done. It's done in many places around.
From my conversations with shopkeepers, store owners along Connecticut Avenue, they believe that this will be, if parking is eliminated on the west side of the street, where most of the shops are in Chevy Chase, it's going to be a disaster for their shops. And the shops are now just recovering from the shock of COVID. So this is going to be a second whammy. And I shouldn't do this, but I can personalize that because my family owns two stores on Connecticut Avenue in this neighborhood. And the operating partner, my son, believes this is going to be an absolute disaster for dropping people off, for parking, for deliveries of food and other services. So I'm hoping when you put that into your thinking, your cost benefit analysis, you think of the shopkeepers very carefully.
Well, I mean, I absolutely do, but I have not done the micro analysis here because it isn't a thing that has been on the table. But when I think about here on the east side of the street for a bunch of it, I see less of a need for street parking than I see on the west side of the street. And so if there's parking on one side of the street, how do you do it strategically? And if this site, I don't know that you need parking in front of the Wells Fargo store. I don't know that you need parking in front of where the church is there. I don't know that you need parking in front of the Safeway where there's a big parking. I don't know that you need parking in front of the gas station. So there doesn't need to be parking here, and then there can be parking and loading on the other side of the street. That's just, whatever it is you do it as thoughtfully as you can in order to make sure that those businesses can succeed.
We have a question from Kathy Ledane. Kathy?
Hi, thank you for coming. One of the things that I'm very interested in is programming for both the library and the center. And my family, my kids, we attend all kinds of programs here. Over the last few years, and certainly with COVID, things have disappeared. So programming in the future is a very exciting thing for me to contemplate. And one of the things that I've heard from neighbors and other people in the community is the need for a pre-K program in North Free and also senior center. And those two things could be accommodated here, I think. But I'm just curious what you think about it, especially since those services are not available in North Free, unlike the other ones.
Yeah, so pre-K3 is programming. I think we need to have DCPL, the libraries, and DPR be coming out along the way to get input on what kinds of programming the community wants to see in these facilities, because it's going to serve this community. They should be getting input from the community. The libraries, I think, are clearly open and receptive to that. I haven't met with DPR. So it's not just that you have a great new building, it's that it is alive with great programming. And so that's, again, we need to work together to make sure that happens. Pre-K3, we need to find different sites to have pre-K3 in Ward 3. I'm not sure. One of the things that people say about this site is we're loading so much up onto this site already that it becomes a challenge. And so I'm not sure you use this site as the pre-K3 site. There had been a time, I could get myself in trouble, where the city was looking at renting space at the Episcopal School. to have pre-K3, and they didn't. In the end, they didn't pursue it, and they didn't pursue it because when DCPS rents space, it's paid for out of operating dollars. When they build the space, it's paid for out of capital dollars. So when they're paying for it out of operating dollars, it takes away from the money that they can be spending to serve kids in classrooms. Well, there's an easy fix for that. Take rental of facilities out of the pot of money that DCPS uses to serve schools. And maybe we could get to a place where, for example, the Episcopal school, which I think would be a more natural place than pre-K3 in this area, could, and take pressure off of Lafayette by having pre-K4 there, could serve that kind of a function. That's not necessary, there could be other answers to that, but yes, we need to serve pre-K3 and pre-K4 and Ward 3 better than we have. And there is essentially there's essentially no pre-K3 in the traditional school system in Ward 3. There's a new phenomenon that is really fascinating for people who are in the early childhood space, and that's that OSSE, the Office of the State Superintendent for Education, has a program where early childhood centers can qualify to have pre-K3 and pre-K4 seats that are paid for by the city in their program. So you see places like Communicates, where it's a dual language program and the kids start at 18 months, but when they turn 3 and they're in pre-K3, the city pays for it. And then they go pre-K4. And so there's a bunch of those that have cropped up, and that's kind of changing the ecosystem for pre-K3, pre-K4 in Ward 3, and we'll see how that plays through. Two Birds over by Jackson Reed is another. There's 2 or 3 Communicates. St. Albans on the St. Anne's campus is another like that. Others are thinking about it. But we need to find spaces for pre-K3 and pre-K4 in Ward 3. I'm not sure this is a senior center. I advocate for having a senior center. And I know this is not going to be the most popular thing to say in Chevy Chase, but if you had a Ward 3 senior center, I don't think it goes here because it's not by a metro. And think of how far it is if that's your Ward 3 play, where it is from Palisades. So I think actually if we have a Ward 3 senior center, my inclination is not that far from here, but that Van Ness area by the metro would probably make more sense, and there's areas around UDC that would make sense. But to say that this wouldn't be the senior center doesn't mean that this shouldn't be a place that is loaded with programming for seniors. And it has been a good place to serve seniors and can be an even better one. But is it the flagship senior center for Wards 2 and 3? If you didn't live here, would you think that it was the most natural place to put the Ward 2 and 3 senior center? I don't think so. But that doesn't. But again, 100% with you that it should have very significant programming for seniors. And this is another thing that I've spent a decade working on and pushing for. My wife runs around town DC, but I think she's got to go because I don't want to have a conflict by her working there and things that I do in terms of that. That has pressed out a lot of new programming and can do more of that kind of thing. So
Thank you. I promised that we would be out of here by 10 of, so we've got about 10 more minutes. Lee, would you?
Actually, Robert, why don't you read the questions, because people online have a hard time hearing it from the audience.
I would do that, but I can't read it right over. So Lee, would you speak up?
I will speak up. Okay, where are you, Matt? on whether or not the 1.7 acre Civic core can accommodate a new library, a new community center, underground parking, and still not infringe on the residential area of the Northampton and McKinley streets, even with 8 to 10-story buildings and a lot line to lot line construction. Can it be done with that 1.7 acre site?
So and this is, I'm shocked that you're asking that question. And I mean, I don't, I want to see what people can propose and how much can go and how it can work. But one of the things that Lee and some others have suggested is that would it be possible to also use adjacent sites to take pressure, and so you could have something that would more easily accommodate all of the different functions and could be something very special. And I think that that's an intriguing idea, and I intend in my letter commenting on the process to urge that DEMPED be receptive to proposals that could incorporate adjacent developments. And that's always the case, that they would do that. But I wanted to be explicit because I too worry, and that's why I was saying about the pre-K3. And actually, it's sort of another argument about this being the senior center, and then it also should be a rec center that serves everybody. How much can you fit here and succeed? So I want to see what people come up with. But I also appreciate your suggestion that maybe there are ways to take pressure off of the site to do some of it.
So we have one final announcement. Milt?
I just, thank you. I'm a member of the International Dark Sky Association, and knowing that you were on the Environment Committee, IDA, the local chapter, is trying to get PC to participate in a lights out hour, only 1 hour, March 25th, from 8:30 to 9:30. And I'd like everybody to know that and see if you would approve of that.
I don't see why. We want to know more about like why it is that one would do it and what but we'll why. What's the reason for the lights out?
Mainly education to let people know that the world can be better without so much light, and highlight some of the problems with overlighting and some of the benefits of reducing some of the health effects, things like that.
Well, that's intriguing. It's honestly the first time that I've heard about it, so I want to be a little bit careful not to overcommit, but it certainly intrigues me, and you do hear about overlighting as being an issue. So
We have a lot written, and I'll send you some.
please do. And have you spoken to Charles Allen, who's the chairperson of the Environment Committee?
No.
All right, well, send me stuff and we'll explore. Okay.
We have an online question about public safety.
Okay.
Councilmember Frumin, someone in our audience wants to know if you have a plan to stop car break-ins and carjackings in our neighborhood.
I had in the campaign a very developed public safety plan that doesn't go to that kind of specifics, but I guess the way I would address this, because I think maybe one of the things that's on the mind of the questioner is crime is in many ways down, but it's not down everywhere. In some places it's up. In certain kinds of crimes, there's more of them, and it's troubling. And sometimes crime is up in places where it wasn't up before. We have had more guns fired in this area than I have seen in my time living here, which is long. And
this area is in this board.
yeah, this ward, 42nd Street, there was the gunfire over by Jackson Reed, there was gunfire. There was gunfire down Connecticut Avenue. There's, in the scheme of things compared to other parts of the city, it's not a lot of gunfire, but it's more gunfire than at the Burke School, which is something different. It's more gunfire than we are used to, and I don't want to get used to it. And there are places when you look at the crime map data, there are places that might be overall down in Ward 3, but you look at some places along Connecticut Avenue, and it's high. So we need more police presence in the places where crime has been done. And we need to hire more police. We need to train those police to interact with the neighborhood, our neighborhood, and all the neighborhoods around the city as well as possible. The relationship with the police in this part of the city is pretty healthy, and so it's not such an issue. In other places, there's more that we need to do. There was a time when there was like a camp that the police sponsored, and kids would go to that camp. Chief Conti went to that camp, night basketball, things like that. But to answer the question, I think we need a greater police presence here. There's a lot of finger pointing about what are the impediments to accountability. When I talk to some of the police, they want more police on the street, but they also say one of the big issues is actually in the U.S. Attorney's Office. That the U.S. Attorney's Office very frequently they're short-staffed, and so they know paper cases, so they don't pursue prosecution. And then the police feel like, well, we put together a case and we bring it to the U.S. Attorney, and they don't pursue it. So I think we need to be lobbying the federal government to be providing more support to the prosecutors here. But then, and so those are the specific immediate kinds of things that one could do. And I'm very clear about this. So long as we have tens of thousands of people who feel like they have no hope, we're always going to have crime. And so the fundamental answer to addressing crime, it goes to attacking root causes and creating opportunity for people who feel like they don't have opportunity. And I don't think we should ever think that the only answer is more incarceration, stricter penalties. We're never going to incarcerate our way to safety. We need to address the root causes of crime.
Well, thank you. I'd love to go on for another hour. I'm sure you would. But
it's been fun.
we have promised the CCCA staff that we would end at 10 minutes of 8 so that they can help clear up and finish up at 8 o'clock. That's where their finishing hour is. So thank you very much once again for your very strong attention. Thank you, Matt. You've done a wonderful job in helping clarify things.
I have email list sign up right here if you'd like to sign up to receive Councilmember Frumin's newsletter. We're sending one tomorrow, so please do sign up if you're interested. And I also have flyers, so you can follow us on social media or contact our office in other ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
I might steal you out. Thank you.
Around town, do you see these, Lena?